Appreciate that. Tonight, I have Carl Hurst, our rec director, here with myself. I'm Bruce Chestnut, the city manager. Tonight, the purpose of our discussion tonight is to talk about a proposed property exchange and construction of a 20-acre facility for the city of Orem on the Cascade Golf Course location. Tonight, the city council will be looking at the findings of the transaction set forth in an agreement that is before them for proposal to make sure that what we're doing is adequate in consideration and the best interest of the city. Also, the city is looking to declare the property that's being conveyed as surplus, and then to authorize the mayor and the city manager to negotiate any potential minor changes to the proposed agreement, and then fourth, to authorize the mayor, if approved, to sign the agreement. Mr. Hurst is here at this time to provide a little background in some of the issues that we've been dealing with. After Mr. Hurst, I'll take some time to talk about the various components of the deal that we've been working on. Mr. Bruce Dickerson is here representing the other parties involved in the negotiation and representing the developer. He'll spend some time talking about from his perspective. We'll go over some of the finances that are dealing with this component and the exchanges of properties. We'll have specific presentation by the consulting engineer specializing in traffic and parking. They'll make a presentation. Ron Mortimer will lead that discussion for Horrocks and Associates, and then we'll finalize with some presentations on recreation plans and the needs of the city and recreation. That time we'll go back to the city council for opportunities to ask staff and presenters questions. And then the mayor will be up, then we'll go back to you, wherein this is a public hearing that you can open up for comment, and we can go from that point. So we'll turn time over to Mr. Hurst to make an introduction to this.
Mayor, City Council, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you today. 7 years ago, during our first CARE presentation, you heard me express the number one priority from the Rec Commission. That number one priority was to search for additional property to provide sports fields. You've also heard me express that for the last 7 years during each of the presentations. For the past 7 years, gaining sports fields, and I will extend protecting our sports fields that are in jeopardy, has been the number one priority of the Rec Commission. Last spring and summer, we underwent a public process. We held open houses, both from the rec side and the citywide. We talked to hundreds of people. From that, we developed a strategic plan. You voted, the Rec Commission voted on that strategic plan. It was presented to you last fall, and you approved that. In that plan, the number one priority for the Rec Commission was obtain or protect sports fields in Orem City. I believe I received my marching orders 7 years ago. Those marching orders have been reaffirmed to me each year by the Rec Commission. When we were approached a short time ago, I saw this as an opportunity to address that number one priority that's been expressed. This does not address all of the needs for flat sports fields in Orem City, but I think it does do it. The proposal that's in front of you today does take a first step toward protecting the sports fields that we have in jeopardy at this time. Provide a little bit of background in reference to the golf course. Orem City owns the 54 acres, the bottom 9. In 1966, they entered into a lease with Herb Stratton that encumbered the property under that lease. What that means is that Orem City did not have any use of that property. It was to be for a golf course only. That lease has the potential to extend to 2066. There are 25-year recording periods, but the extension of those are at the discretion of the leaseholder, unless we can prove that they're not operating a golf course or they're not charging prices that are comparative. So basically, they are doing that to this day. So basically, the extensions of those are up to the leaseholder. There have been adjustments to that lease. Some of us old timers remember hitting golf balls south of 8th North. In 1977, the city bought out the lease obligation, the lease interest from the Stratton family, and the golf property south of 8th North developed, I'm guessing according to zoning. So having projects or adjustments to this lease is nothing new. It has occurred over the 40 years that it has happened. It is a complicated issue, and as we get into this, I just hope everybody will look at that and do an evaluation of what the city's getting and what they I will have at the end. So, thank you.
Council, at any time, as we're going through this, you're free to ask us any questions and as we work through this. As Mr. Hurst explained, as we look at the property, you can see up on the screen, the property that we're talking about is we can't go all the way up on the chart, but there's these 6 and 7 holes. There's a 5th hole probably up above here, but this is 54 acres of land that the city owned at one time, but as he identified, it is encumbered by a leaseholder. So really, we're talking about two parties that control this property. One being the underlying landowner, which is the city. But in 1966, the city leased that property, and the Stratton family have been paying the city $537 a year for the lease of that property, and they will continue to pay $537 a year for the lease on that property. But we're talking about all this property right here. Some have asked me about a 3.3 acre piece of property that's also included in this transaction. That is pieces of ground that's right over here on this side. This property is not part of the leased property, but is owned by Stratton's, and the individual that is looking to buy, that is buying the lease from Mr. Stratton, is also buying that piece of property right here from Mr. Stratton. The reason why is because the property about right through here, all this area right here, is a property that we're talking about that's going to be proposed as the 20-acre sports complex and park area for the city. The leasehold property is 16.7 acres in addition to the 3.3 acres over here. That makes up the 20 acres that will be part of the park. It's important to understand that at this time, the city cannot sell this property to anybody. We have no right to sell that property because of the lease that's on the ground. The agreement between the city and Stratton allows that the Strattons can sell the lease of the property to anybody. They can negotiate and they can change the owners of that lease. As Mr. Hurst explained, the name of the leaseholder has changed over various times during the years from '66 until now. But Mr. Stratton has the opportunity to sell that lease to anybody. If Mr. Stratton wanted to change the use of this property, he could come to the city and we could talk about the changes of that use. On different occasions, I have personally met with him about changing different elements of the lease description, using some different components of development on different properties within the lease. But we have held that the golf course continues to act as the 54 acres and we haven't changed the lease boundaries. Anybody could approach Mr. Stratton. Mr. Stratton has represented to me over the years that a lot of people have approached him on buying the lease. And as recent, this past few months, somebody has approached him to buy the lease. I would also represent that there's 54 acres of 9-hole golf courses here. As you know, the golf course has been expanded to 18-hole golf course. The upper 9 holes of the Cascade golf course is not under the same conditions of the lease of the lower 9 acreage. That is owned by the Strattons, not the city of Orem. They bought that piece of property and expanded the golf course at their expense to incorporate an 18-hole golf course. Through conversations I've had personally with Mr. Stratton, if somebody's going to buy the lease, they might be looking at also buying that 60 acres that he owns because it is part of a golf course. And I think the individual that is buying the lease, I think part of the condition of buying the lease is that they also have to buy the 60 acres that is up above. And so I think that transaction is taking place. But to understand the complexities, the city cannot sell that property. We can if we buy the lease from Mr. Stratton. I know over the years that has been talked about, that the city has, the city manager prior to myself has had discussions with Mr. Stratton about the lease and about buying it. The city has never concluded any of those arrangements, but that has been discussed. Before we can do anything other than run a golf course, we would have to buy the lease to do that. And the value of that lease is in the millions of dollars to buy that lease. The city is not part of the transaction between Stratton and the party that's buying the lease. That is a separate deal. That deal is between the Strattons and Petersons, not with the city. We are not involved. I have not seen the contract between the two parties. I don't know the final terms of that contract. I just know that Mr. Stratton is giving all of his interest in the lease over to the Petersons, who's buying that lease from the Strattons. The city has been not part of those negotiations. The only negotiations that we have been involved with in this transaction is that after the new leaseholder has approached us on working out this deal of building the park and a residential area on the upper 37 acres. And so those are the basic concepts from the city's perspective. I'll ask Mr. Dickerson, representing the developer and the one that's buying the lease, if he'd come forward at the podium here next, from his perspective, explain if I've misstated anything on the deal from his perspective.
Thank you. My name is Bruce Dickerson, and someone asked me this morning if I've started drinking. I told them I'll probably after the meeting tonight. They said, well, we've heard you started swearing. I said, I've never sworn in my life except for today. By chance or by luck, or however you want to view it, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. Orange City had asked me to help them in some fundraising, and during those discussions, Cascade Golf Course came up about perhaps you could help maybe be involved in helping us protect this open area. I was acquainted, and I am acquainted with Mr. Peterson, and as I visited with him, he expressed the interest of doing something with Cascade Golf Course. And I thought there were two chances of that ever happening, because I did not understand the dynamics. I did not understand that I always believed that you owned the golf course. I did not understand that Mr. Stratton owned the golf course. And so as I got into the middle of this, I realized that there are some huge traditions, some huge history, and some, did I do something wrong? No. Oh. And there would be a lot of things to overcome. So the question that you might ask is, why am I involved? What is in it for Bruce Dickerson? Just to give you a little background about myself, I've been in real estate developing in Orange City and the county for the past 35 years. In that time period, Orange City has been enjoyable to work with and has always been fair to me. I wanted to help out by giving back my time and seeing if I could mediate this transaction. I have no dog in this hunt. I'm not being compensated by Mr. Peterson, Mr. Stratton, or Orange City. As I've looked at this and thought about this, I concluded this very strongly and passionately in my heart. I believe this is a win-win-win for Orange City, the neighbors, and for Todd Peterson. Mr. Peterson was considering a place to build his new residence, and in the discussion I said, you know, here's a good opportunity for you to give something back to the community that he lives in. And At first, he was very hesitant, and it took time. It wasn't an automatic, he wanted to do this. Now, the important thing to remember here, and Bruce has brought this out, is that Mr. Stratton and his family own this business. I had a neighborhood meeting last night. I've had 6 or 7 neighborhood meetings. And within these neighborhoods that live around this park, I would like to just give them a huge applause for being involved and caring. I have never witnessed anything in my time as a developer seeing how people care about what's going on. And you say, well, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened in Orem. It probably is. It's probably one of them. But for these neighbors to take an active part from the east side to the west side is absolutely been phenomenal. And every time it's important for everybody to understand that I have no authority in this. I'm just an information gatherer. I take the information from them, and I listen to you as a city, and the staff has been wonderful. And I listen to Mr. Peterson, and we have these 3 moving balls all the time. And I am not a very good juggler. I can juggle 2 things at a time, myself and my wife. And sometimes that doesn't even work. But we would think we have something tied down, and all of a sudden the city goes, well, no, we need this. And then I go, okay. And then the neighbors go, but no, really, we want this. So what you're looking at right there, do you want me to turn that around?
That's the same as ours.
You got it? Is what I would say is absolutely the best compromise that we have come up with between the neighbors, Mr. Peterson, and the city. As I approached the city about the possibilities, it was